Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unreal Engine 5 for Pavlov modding. Now, I have some very exciting news. We finally have a lot more junk in the map. But in all actuality, we actually have something that was requested a couple of times by a few individuals. And I wanted to finally get this video out because I've been working on it for a little bit. But the original request started as a delivery system that would add money to a player so that way they could buy stuff. So this was kind of a multi-part task, to say the least, because not only was there the delivery system that needed to be made, but now in order to test that the delivery system would actually add money to a player, I needed to then make sure that the player actually had access to a type of money system. So that needed to be developed as well. Originally, I had used the player proxy for this because it would spawn in with the player all the time. Little did I know that was a terrible idea and it was super inconsistent. And that was when I got some advice from this person here. I'm sorry, I can't remember your name off the top of my head. But thank you so much for recommending the player info. It has made a world of difference. It has been incredibly consistent. There are still a couple times where it's like here and there off, but I went through the Discord and apparently, there's nothing quite perfect for it, but it has been many times better than it was before. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So let's start off with the money system first, since we're gonna need to kind of have an idea of how that works. What I did first was I had created a player info. And just to remind you, if you needed to remember how to create a player info, you would right click, you would create a blueprint class, and you could just type in the parent class of player info. And I usually just select the Pavlov player info. From there, you will see just a blank screen like this, and we need to create some custom functions and a couple of variables. Everything in this game needs to be communicated among all of the players, which means we need to be very cautious about the way that we are making functions, and we need to be cautious about the way that our variables are defined. So let's start off with our variables. So I have three different variables. I have the allow purchase, which I will explain that later, but it is a boolean. I have the new money val, which is just an integer. And then I have currency. And currency is going to be the really important one. And that's because this currency needs to be communicated to every single player and to the server. So it's important that this currency is replicated. And basically the only way I can really define what replicated means is that it is communicated across the server to all clients, to all players. So that way everyone has a reference to that specific player's stuff, even if they don't need to know it, but the server needs to know it. So it's really important that this is replicated. Otherwise it is not going to work. So creating these variables is the first thing we need to do. Then afterwards, the first thing I did was I always started off the game by giving the player 20 funds. And the way I did this was I would start with the event begin play. I'd add a little bit of delay because it's never a bad idea. And I would create a function that would add money to the player info. So this is our first custom function. And let's go ahead and jump right into it. So it's really simple. If you ever need to create custom functions, you can either hit this plus button to create a custom function, and then you can give it a name. Or if in some cases, like when we do custom hands, for example, you would do like an override and there would be some other things. In the player info, the only overrides are end play and physics tick, which we don't need to worry about. So we'll create our own one and we're going to call it add money. And this one is really simple. All we need to do is that when this function is called, we need to grab the variable currency, which remember is replicated, and we just need to simply add to the currency a number that we define. Where does this come from? Well, it's an input, and it's an integer input. Basically, whenever this function is called, from another blueprint or from another function, I'll say, it will require an input. And the input in this case must be an integer. Because every time we call this function, we want to make sure that we give it a value so it can add funny muns. Wow, geez, I can talk. And add to your currency. So when we go back to the begin play, for example, you'll notice I have this added funds here. And this is from that input that I created here. When I add this input here, every time I call this function in any blueprint, you will have this input here. So what I do is at the start of the game, I always want everyone to start off with $20. We'll just use dollars for the sake of convenience. I don't want to fumble my words anymore. This logic will be dictated by you anyway, but this is just how I did it. So we call this function, the added funds is 20. We grab our currency, which you can just click and drag from the variables and either do a get set. We're going to do basically that. We're going to get and then we're going to set, but we're going to get the current currency. We're going to add an addition A plus B, and we're going to add the value of the added funds that's coming in to the function. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the output of this mathematical operation and we're going to set the currency. The next thing we want to do is to spend money. Now this one's a little more complicated, but it's still pretty simple. We'll go through it step by step. So when you spend money, we want the opposite thing. We still want to have an input and we want it to be a price. So every time the spend money function is called, we want to make sure that there is a price tag when this function is called. And when this price tag is coming in, we want to do a couple things. One, we want to make sure that we set the allow purchase to false. And I will show you what this means here in a second, but you don't have to do this if you don't want to. You can have this handled elsewhere, but this is just how I'm going to handle it. What we're doing is first, we're going to get our current currency and we're going to do a subtraction. And it's really important that we do the subtraction in a specific order. You'll notice it says A minus B. And it's important that we take currency as A and then the new price as B. If we had this flipped, we would have a negative number and things would really break. So it's really important that the order of your numbers are correct. Currency should always be A and the price should always be B. So we want to check two things, which is why we have this or statement here. We want to check that one, you're not broke. Basically, we want to make sure that your funds are not equal to 0. So we have a equal and A equal B. And then we also want to check before the transaction goes through, before we allow someone to buy something, we want to do a quick mathematical operation beforehand. We want to take our current currency minus the new price, and we want to check to make sure it's not less than 0. If it is less than 0, if this comes back as true, if either of these cases come back as true, then we want to make sure that the purchase is set to false and it cannot ever go through. The transaction is halted. And then we don't obviously want to change the currency because we don't want you to just lose money and then you just don't get anything. And then we return with an output, which is our can purchase Boolean. And I'll show you again why I did that. But again, you can have this handled a different way. If you do have the money and A minus B is not less than 0 and you don't have $0 to start with, your currency gets set. So we obviously do a get set. So now your currency has been subtracted. You now have your new currency. The Boolean is set to allow purchase, and the return node is now you are allowed to purchase. That's our spend and add money. And I'll talk about this balance check here in a second, but it's essentially just every time this is called, we just want to get the currency and return the currency. That's it. Really, really simple stuff. This is just in the player info. There are a ton of ways that you can handle this. This is just how I did it. That is our basic money system. So now we want to have the ability to purchase and to essentially make money. So what I have here is I have a gun, with a custom blueprint, it is just the item spawner that we used from one where you grab and you can just get an item. Just for reference, when we do a client interact box, we want to make sure that it's with the grabbed middle finger. If that is true, then we are going to replicate the interaction on the server, so that way everyone knows. Now the server's been alerted that this interaction has happened, and from that hand, we want to get the player status, essentially, which goes through the proxy, through the pawn, and then through the player status. And then from here, this is where our spend money stuff gets implemented. So what we have here is we have our weapon name and we have our player state. So from the player state, we want to get a player info. And the important thing is that our player info is not just a generic player info, it's a specific one. So we need to cast to that specific one. So we go from a generic Pavlov player info to our test map player info, because this is very unique to our map. So this will contain all the custom functions that we have, like spend money, add money, and check balance. It's really important you don't forget this, otherwise you're not going to see your other functions. So after we cast to it, we go ahead and pull this and we call the function spend money. And if you remember, spend money, which we will double click here, will call this function. So what we do is we set a price, and let's go through the gun that we had on the map, which we said was $5. Now we're calling this, we have an input of 5. So now we have 5 and we have 20. So we do a check. Obviously 20 minus 5 is 15, and we obviously don't have 0. So we're going to allow the purchase to go through. So now we set our currency to 15. We allow the purchase to go through and we return. So now what we return, we have our can purchase. And if this is true, then we will spawn the item. If it was false, then nothing happens. And that's why I have this boolean here at the end, because it's the last check that basically says, can you purchase this item? And that's why I did it in the player info. Again, you can handle this however you want to. You can do whatever. I just had it handled through here. So it was true. It spawns the item. And since this BP will just spawn an item in your hand, that's exactly what it'll do. So now we have a gun that we bought and it's limited. And I have tested this in the map and it does work fine. So perfect. Now we have a way to spend money. Now, how do we add money? Well, so that's where this box comes in. So this was the original request. It's funny how we went all the way around just to finally get to here. The request was something that we would deliver into a box or a specific place that would give us money. We have this box worth $5. So let's go ahead and look at the box. So it is a custom item I created. It's a BP. And it is this. This may look like a lot, but we're gonna go through it one at a time. So the box has a couple of attributes to it. It has the box, it has a trigger, and it has a dominant hand and a VR handle, just so that way it doesn't look stupid when you hold it, but that's not as important. You don't have to worry about these two things. So what we do with this, since it is a VR item, and that's super important, you need to make sure that the parent class is VR item. If you don't know how to do that, you can just right click here in your UGC, blueprint class, VR item, and there you go, there's the parent class. And from here, you can build it. This just makes sure that the item is a VR item. There's a couple of settings that you're gonna wanna make sure you have set. And I'll quickly go ahead and show those really fast. And that's in the box, the root of it. Here we go. So VR item, I mean, you can toggle these however you want it to be. You just wanna make sure that it's pick upable one way, whether it's by trigger, your pointer finger, or by grip, your middle finger. I just did it by grip, middle finger by default. I also made it pocketable because why not? Let's see here. I also made it so that way you can pocket it in these side holsters. You can edit that here. Replication, I don't think I really did anything besides the movement as replicate, and usually this should be by default. Then navigate under box or mesh, and it's under the collision, presets. I made it grabbable, and then I have these settings here for the collision response. Everything that will basically be ignored here is on the left, and then everything that is either overlap or block is here on the middle and right side respectively. So why do I have this trigger? So the trigger is important because I want it to generate overlap events, because there is going to be a script attached to this. So if we go here, you'll notice I have this on component begin overlap specifically with the trigger. Now you can specifically target certain parts of the components by simply right clicking them, adding event, and then you can have all of these. That way we can target specifically just the trigger. We don't want to trigger, or we don't want to target the box because we don't want to have multiple overlap events create some problems. So we're only going to look at the trigger. What we're doing here with the trigger is that we're going to make it specifically interact with trigger boxes. Now, what is a trigger box? Well, trigger box is essentially just a actor. It just has the root class of trigger box, or the type. So that is what's inside of this little pocket here. I have this empty trig box, and I want this box to specifically interact with trigger boxes, but not just any trigger box, because then it could also interact with this and the chicken spawner and basically every single one of these. I want it to specifically target trigger boxes with a specific tag called delivery. In my script, when I cast it to trigger box, I want to then check that the trigger box has this tag delivery. We cast a trigger box and then we cast to player info, and I'll explain that in just a second. So on the pickup, when we have the item picked up, we want the item to associate with that player only. So we want to associate it with a player state. So I'm going to create a variable called player holding state. And all this is it's just going to be the player state of the person holding it. And then vice versa, when they drop it, I want to remove that player's player state from holding by just making it null. When they pick it up by controller, I want to get the pawn of that controller. And from that pawn, I can cast to the Pavlov pawn. And from the Pavlov pawn, we can get the player state. And from there, I can now fill in my player holding state, which is great because that's going to be important for the cast up here. And then again, the opposite with drop, we just remove any value or variable instance by just setting it to null or nothing. After we cast it to trigger box, we then want to cast to player info. And this is going to be important because we're going to reference our player holding state. And I just realized how messy I made this. So give me a second. I'm actually going to make this a little bit maybe easier. So when we cast to test map player info, or to our specific player info, I'm going to grab that player holding state variable by just simply dragging it and doing a get. And then I'm going to get the player info. And from there, I'm going to cast to our specific player info, very similar to what we did here, where we get a player info and then we cast to a specific one. I will cast to our specific player info, and then that conditional that I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that this trigger box that we're interacting with has this tag called delivery. If it doesn't, we don't want anything to happen to the box at all. But if it does, then we want to deliver the box. But there's something really important about this. We need to make sure that the delivery to the box is known server-wide. Otherwise, we're gonna have problems. So it's important that we create a custom event, which again, you could just do event and add custom event. And then from here, you want to make sure that your custom event is multicast, because you need to make sure that everyone else on this server is also able to receive this input. It's going to be really important. So when the box is delivered, we call our special function, which executes on all of the server. And what we do is we grab the value of the delivery, which is also a variable that is replicated. We need it to be. And from here, you'll notice that we have an input. We have our test map player info as an input because we need to make sure we're targeting that player who just delivered the box and add money to their specific player info. So we take that player info, which is why we cast to it really, and we plug it into delivered. And now that we have a player's specific info and the value of a delivery, we call this function. So we add $5 to our 15, which we'll just go off of from last time. And now we set it back to 20. Again, make sure this is replicated on the server. Otherwise, it's going to be out of sync with everyone. And the last thing we want to do, and this is why we executed it on the server as multicast, we want to destroy the actor. We want to make sure that once the box is delivered, it's destroyed almost immediately. Otherwise, you can just take it and flail it in the volume and just keep getting money over and over and over. Now, you don't have to just destroy the actor. You can handle however you want. If you want to make it where essentially the actor just freezes and then it stays there and then eventually goes somewhere else by the end, or animates and goes to some shelf or whatever, you do it however you want. This is just what I did for the sake of this tutorial. It's going to destroy it, it's going to vanish, and that's it. Great. So now we have a system that both will deliver an item and give you money, and will also allow you to buy an item if you have money. But how do you know how much money you have? There are several ways that you can approach this, whether it is doing a custom scoreboard, which is how I would recommend it. But for the sake of this tutorial and not being too complicated, we created a volume that will check your balance for you. So what is this balance box? So this balance box is what we call check currency. It is a trigger box parent class object. So again, right click, blueprint class, and then trigger box. And this is why I said it was important to make sure that the specific trigger box has a specific tag. Otherwise you could trigger and get money from just flailing all over other stuff, which we don't want. So we have this check currency, and what this will do is there's two parts to it. And I wish I would have done this for the rest of these because this is a lot cleaner, but I added comments just to try and do this. This is what I did with my BP for the Killer Clown game, just because it started getting really hectic. But there's stuff that needs to happen on both the client side and the server side. So let's take a look at the viewport. There are several components that are made up for this BP. We have our collision component, which is our trigger volume. We have the sprite, which is just the little box there. And we have a text very similar to our skin box. And then we have a cube that's just called the trigger volume with a transparent material. And specifically with this one, we turned off all the collisions and made sure you can't step on it just so you can walk right through it. Perfect. And we made sure to check that all of these were visible minus the volume and the sprite, because otherwise you're going to have some weirdness in your screen. Please check out the other video about setting up this stuff. It has better information than I probably can reiterate right now. Let's check out the event graph. So there are a couple things that'll happen. So we want to do some stuff on the client side, which is we want to do an overlap begin and an overlap end. The way that the box works is that when you walk in it, the text balance is going to change to show the number of dollars you have in your player info. And when you walk out of the trigger box, it's going to remove that number and just show balance again. So on overlap, we're going to cast upon. We just want to make sure for both of these, we want to make sure that it's obviously a player walking into it and not just no one. And then what we want to do for the begin is we want to get that player state. And again, we're going to cast that player state to our specific player info, or we're going to take the player state, get an info, and then cast that info to our specific player info. And then we're going to run this custom function called balance check. And balance check is our third function in the player info that I mentioned, which is really simple. It just simply is a function that grabs your currency and outputs it as a return. That's all it does. There's nothing crazy to it. So when this is called, you'll get your balance as an output from your player info. So this is called, and then now we want the text to change, but you can't just have the text change on the client side. Otherwise, it's not going to display the correct number and it's going to show what you started with. And this would be the case even if you walk through it and you wanted to keep it local to just you, they would show what the server sees. So this is more important for the server than it is for just client stuff. So we need to create another function and we need to replicate it on the server. So I called it server text replicate. You can call it whatever you want, but make sure it has multicast on. What we're gonna wanna do is we're going to want to take our balance and convert it to a text. So you can do the to text specifically from integer. And then from this, we want to do set text. And this is where we want to get our trigger text. Now, since it is part of our components, you can just simply right click and type in your component. And then if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see your variables. You can do a get or set, and we want to get it because then we're going to run the set text because this is specifically going to target the text part of the text renderer. So we set the text and we want it to show the balance that came in from server text replicate. And now it's going to show your balance for the word balances, and it's going to show a number, which is your currency. Again, you can handle this however you want. This is just how we did it here. Now, we want to do the opposite. When the player leaves the volume, we want to reset the text. So that way you don't just leave the number of your currency and then it just looks weird. So when we do an actor end overlap, we're going to cast a Pavlov pawn again, just to make sure it's an actual player. And we're going to create another replicated function, and we're going to call this one reset text replicate and set it to multicast. And we're going to do the same thing we did above here, except now we have this new variable, which we created with a text type. And by default, we are calling this balance. So it's just the same word that you see here. And that is pretty much all there is to it. I mean, again, there are so many ways that you can approach this. This is just my way of approaching it. And however you want to do it, go for it. There are mods that exist already that create a currency system, and I highly recommend checking those out. The point of these videos is to get you familiar with how to build your own tools and to familiarize yourself with scripting in Unreal Engine. It's not to be a master. It's not to be, perfect at this stuff. It's just to get you thinking and learning about how these tools work. When we share our tools and when we start working together, that is when these games and these communities really come together. And that's just how I feel personally. So I really hope these videos have been incredibly helpful. I hope that you all have learned something incredibly useful here. In the next video, maybe we'll talk a little bit about the nav mesh bounds volume, because I mentioned that I did try out the chicken spawner. It does work. And it does spawn chickens, but it was really weird when they would just stand there and do nothing. So I created this little nav mesh bounds volume so they could walk around all these things, and I added some obstacles, which is why it looks kind of weird when you look at the ground. I promise that's just the bot navigation. It's nothing crazy. So it would still just look like this in game. So thank you all for watching. I really hope you all learned something really cool out of this. And again, part of the reason I make these is just to really just share some information, and so I can learn better. And also just so that way you can learn how to build these tools on your own. So this has been MaJerati, and I will see you all in the next one.